I'm here today with Celine O'Donovan, who is joining us from Galway City on the west coast of Ireland. Following a successful international career in marketing, Celine is now a published author. Her change in direction was accelerated by personal lessons Celine learned from her diagnosis with breast cancer and its aftermath. Celine's new book is titled Gifts from the Devastation: What Cancer Taught Me About Life. Celine is living proof that the crisis can be the impetus to grow, find meaning, and ultimately enjoy a better life. You can learn more about Celine's journey at CelineO'Donovan.com. So Celine, thanks so much for joining us, and congratulations on your new book.
Thank you so much, Brian. Yeah, it's great to be able to finally see it in print, and lovely to come on the show to talk about it. So thank you.
Yes, yes. I mean, because I work with so many authors, I really have an acute understanding of the journey, the challenge, the difficulty, the perseverance that's required to actually come out with a book. So congratulations for doing all that.
Oh, thank you.
So before we talk about the book, though, maybe you could share with folks more about your background?
Sure, of course. I'm from Galway, as you said, on the west coast of Ireland. Just to give you, I grew up a fairly average life in Galway. One of three children, went to school here, went to university here, went on to a career in marketing in the capital in Dublin, worked there for about 13 years. Really enjoyed that. I suppose I often talk about the stages in the lead up to cancer, which I didn't understand at the time, but I suppose I had a first big, what I call breakdown, at about the age of 30 when my marriage broke down. That was quite a traumatic experience. So as a result, I left my work for a while. I went to Greece. I sort of escaped that and taught English. So it was a bit of, to a lot of people, what might have looked from the outside, a very idyllic life, on the beach in the afternoon, teaching English. I was in a relationship with someone, but I was still deeply in pain. And there was, it was as people call it, a Shirley Valentine moment when I ran away. But I needed it. And then I came back to Ireland in 2005, back to Galway, still sort of reeling a bit, in after the aftermath of what had happened. Got a job in the local university in marketing again, which I loved, working with teenagers, loved that too, really helping and supporting them in terms of going to university. So I loved that for many years. And then I suppose the lead up to the book was really my diagnosis with cancer, and that happened in 2016. And what I often say is that in the years leading up to it, I suppose there were quite a few wake-up calls I was getting. And I talk to people a lot about that, just to be aware, of the little nudges life gives us. So I had been feeling quite burnt out for a few years prior to my diagnosis. I suppose I had lost my joy for my job. I'd become a little bit disillusioned with the system and the type of work I was doing. I had outgrown it as well. I had felt I was reached a point where it was becoming very repetitive and monotonous for me. Life was beginning to feel like that too. It's sort of interesting. I used to drive to work in traffic and go, oh my God, this can't be it. Is this it till I die? I didn't sign up for this. So that was sort of going on as well. I sort of felt I was lacking any sort of creative outlet. I didn't really understand that, but I really understand it now. I felt I was very suppressed, and I used to look at people, I only can see this now, who had a lot of creativity in their life, and I was quite resentful, and I didn't understand it completely. I just thought, why are you so resentful? So that was going on. I had some unhealthy relationships in my life. And then I had a car accident a year prior to the diagnosis. So the car accident, now on the surface, my life, like most people, and that's why I say this, I was functioning, as most of us are, but we never know what's going on behind the scenes for someone. And I'm so much more conscious of that just because we presented a certain way. But the car accident wasn't very serious physically, but it shook me up mentally, emotionally, spiritually, primarily. And I had a bit of what I think must have been some sort of a nervous breakdown. I never had that before. I don't know what it was. That's the only words I can find, because I couldn't mentally function for about a month. It was just literally everything. Even if someone rang me on the phone, everything was sort of it was like static. So that was definitely a clear sign, you need to slow down. But once I felt able, I was back again on the treadmill until I got the diagnosis with cancer. So that's sort of the starting point. I had never written anything, really, apart from in marketing. But so that was sort of the picture of, I suppose, a summary of the life leading up to, the big
Wow.
breakdown that was cancer. Yeah.
Wow. We've all
Mm,
got our
mm.
own,
Yeah,
interesting, unique stories, don't we?
exactly, exactly.
That you can't
Yeah,
predict a lot of.
yeah, yeah.
So,
Everybody has a story.
so, what made you decide to turn this into a book? Your experience with cancer and everything else.
No, I don't, whether it was a decision or not, but something greater took over. I say to
Huh.
people that when I went into cancer, when that happened and the diagnosis, um, the way I look at it now, or I experienced it, was once I got over the shock, which it was shocking, and hence the title of the book, Gifts and Devastation. It was a devastation, but out of that came gifts. I always say to people, it wasn't the cancer necessarily itself was the gift, it was the gifts that came from it. But it basically was a breakdown, if you want to call it, in my life. I feel how I experienced it, everything was powered down. My mind, my body, my life. So it was like I was being shown, look, you're gone way off track here. We need you to sort of redirect. We need you to take time out. And a higher force, God, source, my creator, took over and came in. That's how I experienced it. I could feel the energy of it. I just let go. And I think there's a point in our lives when we nearly know, when we're fighting with life. I knew I was fighting with life, but I was afraid to let go. But something let go. And once that happened, something greater took over. All I can say is I felt such peace. I felt such calm. All these things that I craved in all of my life. So I went through that process, which took a couple of years because I suffered with severe fatigue and I was slowed down. So what led me to writing, all I can say is initially I knew I can't go back. I just remember saying, I cannot go back to the life I was living. I had been looking for a way out. This was it, but I didn't know where to go next. I was sort of in a no man's land, and I needed to be in that no man's land for a while. But I think once I set the intention inside and said, I'm moving forward in a new direction, I just knew it. Something had woken up in me. I started talking to people in that way. And then out of the blue, I bumped into someone I hadn't seen since I was in school. So my gosh, I don't know, 30 years before. And we got talking. And I think it's important to talk about these things when you're ready, because that's how you start sowing the seeds, by sharing with people, and then they maybe can help you. I'm a big believer that often we don't know how to unlock the next stage of our lives. Often other people are needed to unlock,
Hmm.
have the key. And unless we start reaching out and connecting, then they can show themselves. So I started talking to her. I didn't know her, but we connected, and I didn't know her that well. And I just started saying how difficult I was finding it. Cancer had been difficult, but this was harder because I didn't know how to transition into the next stage of my life. The transitions, as we all know, can be challenging. So she just happened, then we had that conversation, and then she contacted me a while later and said, look, there's a friend of mine doing a course called The Artist's Way
Hmm.
by a book called Julia Cameron, which I'm sure you've heard of.
Right, right, of course.
Yeah. And I was, but sure, I'm not an artist. It's not for me. And she said, no, 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 we all are. Sure, we're all artists of our lives. But so I was so lost. I said, yeah, why not? And this was the turning point for me. This is how my writing got started. I went to this course, a beautiful group of women, as it happened, 6 of us, very supportive community. And the woman who was learning it had been a school teacher, or teaching it, sorry, had been a school teacher of mine years before. And as the weeks passed and we all shared and talked about what was going on for us, she happened to say to me, she said, you're always talking about what you're learning from your experience with cancer. Would you ever think of writing about it? And I was, no, I've never written anything. Oh, me, I couldn't write anything. But again, this was another person who was sent to me. So I left her house. I remember the particular day I just had a coffee with her. I came home and I just said, there was obviously something ready and bubbling up. Something was bubbling up. I opened up my laptop and I said, sure, I'll give it a go. And I just started writing, and the tap came on, and I just stayed writing for 6 months. Now, I didn't know at that stage it was going to be a book. Initially I just started. But the interesting thing is it was like it was downloaded. It came out in chapters almost.
Wow.
I'd get a theme and I wouldn't know why, and I would just start, and I would, it obviously took quite a while because I wrote it in about 6 months. But then I took it to a publisher in Galway. I didn't know what to do. I said, I have no idea. I've never, I just about wrote something. I don't even know if it's a book. But this was very interesting and unusual in a way, I thought at the time. So this is 2017 or 2017, 2018. And I went to this publisher, and a self-publisher. She read it and she called me in and she said, look, good news to tell you, you can write. Oh, I think you can write, but I'm going to suggest something you might find a bit strange. Would you think of writing fiction? Because I think you have a voice for fiction.
Wow.
So I was, fiction? This is really bizarre. And I've just written my life story and you're saying go write fiction. So I was a little bit insulted and I was a little bit complimented. I didn't really know how to feel, but I said, okay, I'm not doing anything else. I'll give it a go. And as I started to drive home, I could start hearing these little voices and ideas in my head, which was really interesting. So I went home and I did start. I left the other one aside. And I ended up writing a book called The Tapestry of Life, which is about the power of community. And I went to a writing course. So that took about a year or two. But the reason I'm sorry, I'm just sharing this is because this book is only being published now. But now I understand. I would say to someone, you don't always understand why life is unfolding the way it is. And I still thought it was very strange because when I self-published that book, people assumed it was my life story. And I had to explain, no, well, it is and it isn't. It's obvious, I don't know if there is such a thing as fiction really, because it definitely was, representative of my life. There's three generations of women in this book in Galway. So that book came out of that, and it was about the power of community. And to me, it was reflecting what I needed to learn, what I was learning. So I obviously needed to write that. And then when we went into lockdown in 2020, I went back and I revisited this book. And that makes sense to me because I needed time to process and learn and get distance, when you're very close to an experience. So I think other layers came into the book, other layers of what I had learned that I hope the reader benefits from having a bit of time and distance. So I then went on, and I got a publisher this time for the book in the UK. So it was sort of an unusual journey, really. But yeah, that's what.
Well, I think everyone's journey is unusual.
I suppose.
Everyone that I talk to about books,
yeah,
this all finding unique, unpredictable kind of a series of events that eventually led to a book. In many cases, most cases.
Yeah, I'm sure you see that absolutely. Yeah.
So, the title of the book, you talk about gifts. The gifts from the devastation, of what would you say are the main gifts that you felt came out of this?
Wow, so many. Well, I think even if I can say how I feel as a human being on the planet, that in itself, I've never felt such joy and peace. And I mean, I have my ups and downs, but a capacity to cope and deal with life. But overall, I suppose for me, it was a connecting to something greater in my life. I had always sensed that as a child. I had always been, as a very young child, all young children are, and then the systems we grow up in often, are conditioning us nearly to be going outward for everything. But this experience brought me back inward, and I just found this connection with this inner, I call it my inner power source, life source, God, true nature. Everybody has a different experience of it, but it was a very personal, and just the peace that came from that. And that then it's spread out to my life in so many ways. I mean, number one would be creativity. I had no creative outlet in my life. I really didn't. And I suffered. I think we are creative beings as human beings. And doesn't matter what it is. It doesn't have to be writing or painting or any of the traditional arts, but you just need to be expressing who you are. And I wasn't living a very authentic life because I suppose that was my life story, was I need to keep myself small to sort of survive in the world and fit in. And I'm meant to fit in, which I don't believe we are. We're meant to stand out as ourselves. So that's been enormous gift. I mean, that's just beyond anything. And coming back into that power, I call it sovereignty and that truth and knowing. I have a very strong inner knowing and connected to who I am and authentically, and it's nothing to do with the outer world and what I own and what I do. It's just a much deeper, I think only through experiencing it can you really so that has to be number one. I've a lovely sense of flow in my life. So I describe life now as a co-creative process, and I talk about it in my book, where I sort of join with that energy, that force, that God force, and I create. So it's very flow. I live very intuitively now. I mean, I obviously, like everyone, have to do the things you need to do, but my decisions are guided from a much higher and truer place. And I generally don't try not to do anything that doesn't resonate with that, because I trust it. I know it's my truth. It's like the warning, like my strongest message as well for anyone is really, the biggest message of the book really is about reframing, I suppose, or looking at your life as happening for you rather than to you. And I always put that question to people, what even in the midst of something difficult, what if you could just ask that question? What if this is happening for you, to help you, to get you on your path, to really get you to shine in your life and do what you came here to do? And sometimes we need, don't we? We need painful wake-up calls, because I had painful wake-up calls for years. I was a slow learner. And I always say it doesn't mean you don't honor and go through. I'm not trying to belittle the grief and the pain that as human beings we go through. But how can you go beyond that afterwards? To me, it opened me up to totally new possibilities. I couldn't be doing this if I hadn't gone through what I did. There's just no way. I couldn't have learned what I learned. So the gifts go on and on. I say, what do they say? The gift that keeps on giving.
So a few minutes ago, you mentioned that a big transition was when you decided to let go.
Mhm.
So what would you say were like the main things that you had to let go of at that point?
Number one, I suppose trying to control my life is big. In a way, a lot of things had been taken from me, in the sense that in a big breakdown, like my job, relationships, I wasn't able to function in the way I had been. I had been a doer goer, very fast moving, fast living. So just by the nature of cancer and the fatigue that I suffered, all of that was gone. I couldn't pretend in relationships where maybe I was a bit of I wouldn't say a doormat is the wrong, maybe not a very kind word, but I was a little bit like that. I believed sort of my role was always to make sure everyone else was okay. I didn't have a great sense of self. So all of those things were taken from me. I was like the masks were taken from me. So all of these layers of who I thought I was were just stripped away, and I was left bare. So I had to let go of all of that persona, let's say. I had to let go of this illusion that I had that I could control my life. And I was only suffering as a result. I had to let go of my view of how I believe the world should be, my life should be, how others should be, everything really,
Wow.
everything, you know.
So now that you've written the book, what would you say would be like the major ways it would benefit people?
Well, I suppose I say to people, this book firstly isn't just if you've had cancer. I mean, I happen to talk about cancer because it's my story. So for anyone who's maybe struggling through any devastation, or just generally dissatisfied in life, maybe feeling a bit unfulfilled, maybe feeling they want to change, I think this book, I hope, has something in it for you, because just to explain very briefly, I wrote it in three parts. The first is sort of, I suppose, my story of my life leading up to cancer, a very typical life of someone with the typical challenges and ups and downs, and what that was like, and how cancer and a breakdown came in, and what was that like personally. So I write it very personally. I talk about the transformation. So what started to shift in me? What were the key things, like the letting go? There was so many things that started to shift. And then in the third stage, I call it co-creation. I talk about the tools and the steps and the practical things I do every day still to create my life. So my main hope is that someone reading it, I don't claim to have any answers, I just share my story, is that it will prompt people who may be struggling to be able to go beyond the pain of what they're living through, or maybe the satisfaction or whatever it is, and prompt them to go on the journey that I went on. Because what I have found is it's a very unique experience, and can't have the answers for someone else. But I have got to a place that is of such joy and peace and I know it's available to everyone. So my hope is that someone reading this, it will take them on that journey for themselves into their own lives and help them find that power within them to be who they came here to be, because that's my biggest lesson from all of this is we're all so unique and we're all needed on this planet. None of us can offer what anyone else has to offer. So we only benefit when everyone shines. So that's my hope, that someone will find that their creative gifts and way of being in the world and shine them out brightly. And I believe that is, sorry, so I hope that's there for people when they read it or listen, because I have an audio book as well.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
I mean, we're still in the throes of trying to come out of the pandemic. Have you been able to do much in the way of like in-person speaking opportunities or book events? Or has it been
No,
all pretty much online?
a little bit of both, a lot online. I did have a launch, sort of a small launch. I was at a creativity retreat. It was a small enough group in County Clare in Ireland on the cliffs, near the cliffs of Moher. I think Americans might have heard of the cliffs of Moher. They're on the
Sure.
west coast. Yeah, so it was down in a beautiful part of the country at the early March. So I sort of a small type of launch. I got to speak at an event, but it was a bigger retreat. But it was all about creativity and freedom, and it was a beautiful event. I've signed some books locally here. What I'm hoping to do now coming into the summer is I've connected with a good few local bookshops in Ireland, and I'm hoping to take it on a little mini book tour. They won't be big events, but like certain towns have asked me to go into a cancer centre or a writers group or other people who have an interest in change and holistic ways of living life. And so, yeah, I'm looking forward to that, you know. But I think, yeah, we just have to see how things unfold in the coming months, but it would be really nice. And then as I'm doing a lot of podcasts like this, so, you know, it's a mix. It's been a wonderful, as you said, you know, the way the pandemic has happened, but in the same way, I don't know that I would have been sitting here on Zoom maybe with you if it hadn't happened. You know, it's become, hasn't it? It's allowed us connect with each other all over the
Absolutely.
world in a wonderful way.
I hadn't even been doing these interviews until
Really?
the pandemic started.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Okay.
And I knew that so many of my author friends were going to be introducing books and couldn't go on book tours, couldn't speak at conferences, you know, couldn't do signings, et cetera. So I said, I've got to come up with something, you know, to help them get the word
Yeah.
out when they have a new book.
Yeah.
So that's how it started. And,
Okay.
you know, I've done, I don't know, hundreds of them now, but, you know,
Wow.
it's nice that we have had this technology. I mean, at this
Yeah.
quality and at this ubiquity, um,
Yeah.
you know, available to us through this terrible 2 years we've been.
Yeah. Yeah. And as well, isn't it, connecting with like-minded people, because it can be quite isolating depending on your circumstances. I found that quite difficult, but I've just ended up in so many different groups and courses. And I mean, you have to limit it to, or you can get zoomed out if you have too much Zoom.
It really
And
breaks
Nate,
down to
yeah,
the geographical barriers, you know,
it
that have
does. It
traditionally
does.
limited all of us.
Yeah. And don't you think, I sort of hope that after all of this and when we're all traveling freely again, that it's breaking down so many barriers in many ways, and understanding and getting to know each other, that I think will open up this whole global community. Let's say that I can see myself traveling a lot more because I've connected with a lot of people around the world. And some of them I feel closer to than people down the road, you know, which is
Absolutely.
life, isn't it? So it's,
Same way.
yeah, yeah. So we'll take the gifts from it.
So speaking of connecting, I mean, I mentioned your website earlier, but how would you suggest for people to connect with you beyond that?
Well, I have through the website, I have a link tree as well, but basically on the website they can order. So through the link tree, which I can give I see I have a website, so you can buy the book through that. Also, I have the audio book, which I recorded and narrated myself, and I'm selling direct, which I really enjoyed doing. So they can connect that way. I also have a mailing list. So if they go through the link tree or through my website, you can sign up to my mailing list, because I have a YouTube channel. So I'm basically trying to, my plan is to sort of expand on the messages in the book and bring them to life and in real time and talk about them, and hopefully provide some support and help to people. So if people like what they hear or like in the book, do please sign up to the mailing list. I'd love to connect. And another thing I say to people as well, sorry, I won't go on too long. It's just if anyone who is struggling right now, or whether it's with cancer or anything else, I'm very happy to have, I trained as a life coach. It's not something I actively do now, but I want to develop this into more support for people. So if anyone wants to reach out who is struggling and would like a listening ear, even for half an hour, or to talk through what they're going through, I'm very happy if they want to do that.
Nice. Nice. So that's generous of you.
Yeah, I'd be very
So
happy.
I have to ask you about the future. Do you have any other books planned?
Yeah, well, I also suppose have something. Yeah, I find this whole creative process is so new to me. Once you turn on the tap, it's like, oh my God. After years of not having a tap turned on, I suppose I should be grateful. And there's moments it's not. I started a course and I'm doing it again. This is something that if people are interested in, they'll find the links on my YouTube channel. But it's a course with a wonderful man, a sort of a spiritual entrepreneur who's now based in Ireland. He's English, and it's a beautiful course about really helping you maybe whatever gifts and ideas you might have to bring them into the world. And usually it's people from a very holistic background. And how do you it's about financial sovereignty. So how do you go on and create that life for yourself, sharing your gifts? So as part of that, we do a lot of technical things, but also it's also helping us tap further into our creativity and writing more. So I'm out of this book. I've written a draft of something which is really about tapping into the powers that I talk about, the gifts, tapping into that a little bit deeper, I think, and really how do you bring them to life now that I've had more time, and sort of broadening out that, what does that mean, and what really is it? People often find that hard. So I'm sort of working on that. It's, yeah, so we'll see. I hope to have something that will develop this further, but
Good.
yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
wonderful.
Who knows?
So again, the new book from Celine is Gifts from the Devastation, What Cancer Taught Me About Life. And you can learn more there we go. There's the cover. Beautiful
That's
cover.
the cover.
Love
Yeah,
that.
nice. Yeah, isn't it? The sunflower.
Nice coloring.
Isn't it? Yeah.
Yes,
Well, it's
absolutely.
interesting. I'm big into the chakras and things, and I just thought turquoise is all about the throat and communication and expression. And the yellow, which I love, the sunflower, it grows towards the light. But the yellow is like your personal power as well. So it wasn't consciously, but yeah, nice colors, aren't they? Well, I wanted it to be uplifting because, when you see cancer and something like devastation, it's really to go to the other side of this. This is what can be the other side of something
No, it's
devastating.
a very eye-catching
Oh,
and
thank you.
positive, cover. I
Yeah.
like it a lot. And then, of course, as I mentioned earlier, you can go to Celine's website, CelineO'Donovan.com. So, Celine, thanks so much for joining us. Thanks for all your work, and best wishes going forward.
Thank you. Thank you, Brian. Thanks very much.